Get your filthy hands off me. I don't need some ghetto charity case wiping me down. The words weren't shouted. They were worse. They were spoken with the calm, cutting precision of a surgeon's scalpel, designed to dissect a person's dignity layer by layer. They sliced through the opulent air of the St. Regis Astor Court in New York City, a place so steeped in old money that the silence itself felt expensive. That silence shattered. The delicate melody from the harpist in the corner faltered. A string plucked wrong. The clinking of Christoffel silverware against Wedgwood china stopped dead. Conversations about billion-dollar mergers and summering in the Hamptons evaporated into the gilded ceiling. Every head turned, every eye, from the titans of industry to the IBABIG, junior analysts hoping for a crumb of recognition, swiveled to table one. And in the periphery, dozens of smartphones, previously hidden beneath napkins, tilted ever so slightly, their small red lights blinking on like malevolent eyes. The revolution, it turns out, would be recorded. What are you about to hear is not just a story. It's a goddamn reckoning. A story about power, prejudice, and the catastrophic mistake of underestimating the person pouring your water. And if you believe that the world needs more reckonings like this, that respect should be the currency we all trade in. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because you are not going to want to miss a single solitary second of this. At the center of the storm, Julian Thorne, the 42-year-old billionaire CEO of Apex Dynamics, didn't so much as flinch. He was a man carved from ambition and arrogance, a titan of the tech world who saw people as assets or obstacles. Right now, he was merely annoyed, brushing at the sleeve of his Tom Ford suit, where a few drops of a 1982 Petrus, a wine that cost more than the waitress's monthly rent, had dared to land. The spill was an imperfection in his perfectly curated world, and he swatted it away with the casual cruelty he reserved for anything that inconvenienced him. Across from him, Ava Sterling stood perfectly still. She was 28 years old, and in her stillness there was a universe of strength. A folded linen cloth was still in one hand, the heavy silver water pitcher in the other. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer a panicked apology. She simply held his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the room's chandeliers, unblinking and profound. She didn't need to react. Her silence was a weapon of its own. What Julian Thorne didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend in his hermetically sealed world of private jets and yes-men, was that Ava wasn't just another struggling waitress working a high-stakes dinner. She wasn't there because she had to be. She was there because she chose to be. She was there to watch, to listen, to learn. She was an observer in the lion's den, gathering intelligence from the ground floor up, because the man sitting at the head of the table, the quiet, unassuming investor, Julian was trying to land for a $5 billion acquisition, the man whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's in this room. That man was Marcus Vance, and Marcus Vance was Ava's father. Julian Thorne didn't just insult a black woman in a service uniform. He had just detonated a bomb in the lap of the most important person in the room. He had just shown his entire ass to the one man who held the future of his entire $10 billion empire in the palm of his hand. And he did it while the whole world was starting to watch. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a cautionary tale. This is a story for every single person who has ever been belittled, ignored, or made to feel invisible. If you have ever been judged by your appearance instead of your intellect, if you've ever had your voice silenced by someone with a bigger title, then you need to stay for every last word of this. And if you believe that a person's character is revealed, not in how they treat their equals, but how they treat those they perceive as beneath them, then smash that like button. So this story reaches every corner of the internet, because tonight, the waitress was a queen in disguise, and the king of the castle was about Toby served a lesson so expensive it would beggar his entire kingdom. Ava Sterling was not born into a world of silver pitchers and whispered fortunes. She was forged in the fires of resilience. Her life was a testament to the fact that strength isn't about the absence of hardship, but the grace with which you carry it. At 28, she had already navigated more loss and responsibility than most people do in a lifetime. Her mother, a vibrant, life-loving nurse, was stolen from her by an aggressive cancer when Ava was just 18. It wasn't a gentle fading, it was a brutal, swift invasion that left behind a mountain of medical debt and a silence in their small apartment that was louder than any scream. Her own father had been a ghost, a name on a birth certificate she never met. The day after the funeral, with the scent of lily still clinging to her black dress, Ava looked at her 10-year-old brother, Leo, and understood that her life was no longer her own. Leo was her world. Born with cerebral palsy, he navigated life from a wheelchair. Buddhist spirit could outrun the fastest man on earth. His smile was a sunrise that could dissipate the darkest clouds of her exhaustion. His needs were constant, complex, and expensive. But to Ava, they were never a burden. They were her purpose. She had been on the precipice of her own greatness once, a track star at Stanford, on a full athletic scholarship. She lived for the burn in her lungs, the explosive power of leaving the starting blocks, the singular focus of the finish line. The Olympics weren't just a dream. They were a viable, tangible goal. But reality has a nasty habit of tripping you at the final hurdle. The medical bills from her mother's illness were a relentless tide. Rent in Palo Alto was unforgiving. Leo's specialized physical therapy, the key to his mobility and independence, was non-negotiable. So she made a choice. She hung up her track spikes. She walked away from the roar of the crowd, the feel of the metal around her neck, and stepped into the quiet, grueling marathon of survival. 3 jobs, 6 days a week. 2 of those were overnight. Shifts at a local diner where she'd study flashcards for online business courses, between serving coffee to truckers and tired students. She never posted inspirational quotes about her struggle on social media. She never complained. She never asked for a handout. Ava believed in the dignity of quiet work. The world didn't need her tears. It needed her resolve. Her face was a study in contrasts. High cheekbones that spoke of an aristocratic lineage she knew nothing about. Soft, almond-shaped eyes that held an old soul's wisdom. And a jawline that hinted at an unbreakable will. People looked at her and saw a beautiful girl. They rarely bothered to look closer to see the warrior within. She let them underestimate her. In a world like this, being underestimated was a superpower. Invisibility was a form of armor. Her job at the St. Regis wasn't an act of desperation. It was a calculated strategic move after Marcus Vance had come into her life 5 years ago, after he had found her and revealed himself as her biological father, who'd been searching for her for years. He had offered her the world, a corner office, advanced capital, a trust fund that would eliminate every financial worry, a life of comfort and ease. She'd politely but firmly refused it all. "I can't lead from a skyscraper," she had told him over their first tentative dinner. "I don't know that world. If I'm going to be a part of your legacy, you need to understand the foundation. I need to see how the world really works, Marcus. Not from the top down, but from the bottom up. I want to see how the men you do business with treat the people they think don't matter. And so began her undercover mission. For 2 years, she had worked in the trenches of luxury service. She had seen it all. She saw how power moved in the silent nod between billionaires. She saw how true kindness was a rare commodity, often found in the staff kitchens, not the grand ballrooms. She saw how cruelty, disguised as confidence, was not only tolerated, but often applauded. Most importantly, she learned that the people who are ignored the most often see and hear the most. She was a living, breathing audit of corporate character. So when Julian Thorne spat his venom at her in a room full of the world's most powerful people, Ava didn't flinch. She didn't crumble. Because a queen doesn't react to the barking of a common dog, she simply observes. She remembers. And she waits for the perfect moment to remind him who truly holds the leash. Julian Victor Thorne was a man who did not believe in apologies. Apologies were for the weak, for those who made mistakes. He didn't make mistakes. He made decisions. He believed in leverage, in dominance, in the strategic application of fear. His favorite tool was a specific kind of silence, the one that filled a boardroom after he had eviscerated an employee's idea. A heavy, suffocating silence that lasted just long enough for the unfortunate soul to feel the full weight of their inadequacy. That was power. At 42, Julian had dragged himself to the apex of the tech world by his manicured fingernails. Apex Dynamics, the company he'd started in a cramped Silicon Valley apartment with 2 other guys he later forced out, was now a $10 billion behemoth. The press lauded his disruptive innovation, but Julian knew the truth. Innovation was a byproduct. His real genius was in control. He didn't build his empire by being liked. He built it by being feared. He was a corporate predator, and the market was his hunting ground. His reputation preceded him like a thunderclap. Ruthless in negotiations, unforgiving of failure, the kind of boss who fired top engineers not for failing, but for hesitating. Hesitation, to Julian, was the cancer of progress. It was weakness made manifest. Inside the gleaming minimalist walls of Apex Dynamics, employees spoke his name in hushed tones, like a storm warning. Some admired his brutal efficiency. Most were terrified of him. All of them obeyed. Business wasn't business to Julian. It was war. And in war, you don't build bridges. You create casualties. His public persona was a masterpiece of PR spin. Sharp, impeccably tailored suits. Even sharper sound bites for financial news channels about leaning into discomfort and embracing radical candor. What he never said on camera, what he truly believed in the cold, dark recesses of his heart, was that people were tools, and tools were only useful as long as they performed their function flawlessly. When they broke or became inefficient, you discarded them and got new ones. So when he strode into the Astor at the St. Regis that evening, he didn't see human beings. He saw a chessboard. Marcus Vance, the legendary reclusive investor from Vance Capital, was the king he needed to capture. Everyone else in the room, the other investors, the executives, the waitstaff, they were all just pawns, background noise. He made it a point never to look servers in the eye. He never said please or thank you. Why would he? You don't thank a hammer for hitting a nail. He never once stopped to consider that the person carrying a tray of champagne might one day carry a vote on his board or a voice that could reach millions or something far more dangerous. The truth. He wasn't stupid. He was arrogant. He could read a 100-page contract and spot a misplaced comma that would save him millions. He could anticipate market trends months in advance. He understood the complex dance of finance and technology. But what he never learned, what he never bothered to value, was the simple, unassailable currency of human character. And on this gilded New York night, that singular glaring blind spot was about to become a $5 billion liability. Because the woman he had dismissed as a ghetto charity case, the woman he saw as nothing more than background noise, was about to become the lead story on every news feed in the world. And he was about to become the cautionary tale they'd be teaching in business schools for the next 50 years. The Astor Court shimmered, a dreamscape of calculated opulence. Freshly cut Casablanca lies perfumed the air, their scent mingling with the faint, expensive aroma of leather and vintage perfume. Ivory linens draped over dark mahogany tables, each set with a constellation of crystal and silver that caught the light from the massive chandeliers above. The quiet, elegant notes of a live harpist wove through the room like a silk ribbon. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a coronation, the kind of event where the future of entire industries could be decided over a course of seared scallops, where fortunes were made with a handshake and empires could crumble with a single ill-chosen word. The guest list was a veritable gallery of American power. Venture capital legends who had funded the rise of Silicon Valley, media mogul whose networks shaped public opinion, and even a discreet U.S. senator trying to look like he wasn't there to court donors. But the gravitational center of the entire evening was one man, Marcus Vance. Marcus didn't command attention with noise. He commanded it with his presence. At 68, the German bee-born investor was a quiet force in a world of bombast. His firm Vance Capital was famous for two things: generating astronomical returns and investing own-lion ventures with a strong ethical compass. He had passed on dozens of companies that went on to become giants because he didn't like the character of their founders. What made him so powerful wasn't just his money. It washes impenetrable silence. He spoke rarely, listened intently, and when he finally did offer an opinion, markets moved. Tonight, he was the final piece of the puzzle. Considering a $5 billion full acquisition of Apex Dynamics, the entire tech world was holding its breath, waiting to see if Julian Thorne could close the deal of a lifetime. And just a few feet away from it all, Ava Sterling moved with the silent grace of a shadow. Her crisp black uniform was immaculate, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her posture was flawless. She was part of the room's essential machinery, present and vital, but designed to be unnoticed. She knew the intricate ballet of elite service. She knew which guests preferred sparkling water and which preferred still, which titans of industry were diabetic and needed their dessert sugar-free, who made eye contact and offered a quiet thank you, and who, like Julian Thorne, looked straight through her as if she were made of glass. She felt the tension in the air tonight. It was a palpable thing, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in her bones. She had prepared meticulously, spending the last 2 days memorizing the profiles of every guest at Table 1, reviewing Marcus's known dietary restrictions and Julian's preference for obscenely expensive Bordeaux. She was ready for anything, or so she thought. Julian Thorne held court at the head of the table, his back ramrod straight, his confidence radiating like heat. Marcus sat opposite him, a portrait of calm, his face an unreadable mask of polite interest. Their respective entourages flanked them, a chorus of nodding heads and sycophantic smiles. Ava approached the table, the heavy bottle of 1982 Petrus in her hand. Her steps were silent and steady. Her hand did not shake. She leaned in, her body angled perfectly to pour for Mr. Thorne. And that's when the universe, or perhaps fate, decided to intervene. A junior executive trying too hard to impress Julian gesticulated wildly while telling a story, his elbow catching Ava's arm just as she began to pour. The glass didn't shatter. The bottle didn't fall. The spill was slow, almost deliberate. A river of deep blood-red wine flowing across the pristine white linen. A creeping stain heading directly for the cuff of Julian Thorne's 1,000-suit jacket. A few drops spattered onto his custom monogrammed cufflink. I've reacted instantly professionally. "My deepest apologies, sir," she said, her voice a soft, controlled murmur, already reaching for a fresh napkin to blot the spill. It was pure muscle memory, years of training kicking in. But Julian Thorne didn't see an accident. He didn't see a professional trying to rectify a mistake. He saw an affront, a stain on his perfection. He spoke not like a man addressing a minor mishap, but like an emperor addressing a slave who had dared to scuff the royal marble. "Get your filthy hands off me," he hissed, his voice low, but carrying in the sudden vacuum of silence. "I don't need some ghetto charity case wiping me down." The words hung in there, toxic and radioactive. The entire table froze. Conversations died mid-syllable. Forks and knives hovered over plates. The harpist in the corner let the final note of her piece hang. A dissonant chord in the suffocating silence. Ava stood perfectly still, napkin clutched in her hand, her eyes downcast, not in shame, but in calculation. She had endured microaggressions her entire life. The subtle insults, the backhanded compliments, the jokes whispered just loud enough for her to hear when people assumed she was just part of the scenery. But this was different. This was a public execution of her dignity, and the entire room was a witness. Julian didn't apologize. He didn't show a flicker of regret. He disdainfully plucked a new napkin from the table sitting next to him and dabbed at his cuff, an expression of pure disgust on his face, as if he'd just touched something unclean. One of his vice presidents let out a choked, nervous laugh, a pathetic attempt to diffuse a moment that was now as dense as a black hole. Ava's stillness was her response. That silence, that refusal to be broken, was more powerful than any scream of outrage. Across the table, Marcus Vance slowly, deliberately placed his fork down on his plate. The quiet click of metal on china was as loud as a gunshot. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. But his gaze, cool and analytical, shifted from Ava to Julian, and it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Finally, Ava stepped back from the table. "Please enjoy your meal," she said, her voice perfectly even, impossibly calm. There wasn't a trace of fear or anger in it, only something far deeper, something that sounded like resolve. Around them, the room tried to reboot. The machinery of polite society sputtered back to life, but the conversations were forced, the laughter hollow. Phones buzzed under the tables, not with business deals, but with messages flying back and forth. "Did you hear that? Unbelievable. He's done." The damage was done, but not to Ava. The real fissure, the deep structural crack no one could unsee, was opening right beneath Julian Thorne's expensive Italian leather shoes, and by the time he realized he was falling, he would already be in a free fall, while others at the table awkwardly cleared their throats and shifted in their seats. Marcus Vance remained preternaturally still. It was a stillness that radiated power, the kind that makes people profoundly uncomfortable because it says, "I saw everything, I heard everything, and I forget nothing." At 68, Marcus had seen 100 Julian Thornes. They came with different names, wore different suits, led different companies, but they all shared the same fatal flaw. An arrogance so profound it blinded them to their own humanity and to the humanity of others. He had grown up in the rubble of post-war Berlin, raised by a single mother who had survived horrors most people only read about in history books. She had taught him the immense value of silence, not as a sign of weakness, but as a strategic advantage. "Marcus," she used to tell him in her soft German accent, "when someone truly wants to show you who they are, let them talk. But more importantly, watch them when they think no one of importance is looking. That is where you will find their truth." Tonight, Julian Thorne had paraded his truth for the entire room to see, and unfortunately for him, the most important person in the room was watching very, very closely. He watched how Ava handled Themament with a grace that defied her years. Her voice had been a placid lake, her movements measured and controlled. But Marcus, her father, saw what others missed. He saw the microscopic tightening of the muscles in her shoulders. He saw the almost imperceptible pause behind her eyes as she processed the insult, the split-second decision she made to absorb the venom rather than reflect it. He recognized that pause. He had lived that pause himself many times. It was the pause where you decide whether you will break or whether you will rise. Ava had chosen to rise. He felt a surge of immense pride, but it was quickly followed by a cold, hard sense of confirmation. This was why she was here. This was the experiment. He had offered her every comfort: a senior consulting role, a seat on the board of his foundation. She'd refused them all. "I want to understand the sickness in American business," she'd said. "And you can't diagnose a patient from a textbook. You have to be in the room." Now he understood exactly what she meant. Julian Thorne wasn't just a man. He was a symptom. He had just made the most expensive mistake of his career, and the bill was about to come due. Marcus leaned toward his longtime assistant, a stern-looking man named Klaus, who had been with him for 30 years, and whispered a single phrase in German. As his sight, "It's time." Klaus nodded once, a sharp, efficient movement, and discreetly stepped away from the table, his phone already in his hand. Marcus didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to make a scene. True power doesn't need to shout. It simply watches, it waits. And when the moment is right, it moves with devastating precision. Julian, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath him, had already resumed his sales pitch, laughing a little too loudly, trying to bury the ugly moment under a fresh layer of corporate bravado. But Marcus wasn't burying anything. He was engraving it into memory, into principle, and very soon into the public record. Because when a man's character is tested so publicly, the consequences must be just as public. And Marcus Vance had just made up his mind. The deal was off. The only thing left to decide was how spectacularly it would end. The subsequent courses arrived like actors in a play that had already been canceled. Wait staff placed plates of pan-seared duck breast and truffle ursado on the table with the silent efficiency of ghosts. Wine glasses were refilled. Water was topped up. The motions of a five-star dinner service continued, but the soul of the meal was gone. The appetite at table 1 had vanished. Marcus sat with his hands folded on Thetable, his plate untouched. His silence was an indictment heavier and more damning than any accusation. Julian Thorne, however, was a man who believed he could bend reality to his will through sheer force of personality. He kept talking, kept pitching, his voice growing louder, more desperate. Ash tried to claw back the room's attention. "Look," he said, leaning forward and trying to make eye contact with Marcus, who offered none. "The difference between winners and losers in this business is focus. Winners aren't derailed by minor distractions. They execute. They dominate." His own executives, seated around him, nodded with the frantic energy of bobbleheads on a dashboard, their eyes pleading with him to just change the subject. Marcus didn't nod. He simply picked up his water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down. His gaze fixed on Julian, Ava returned to the table. She moved with a quiet dignity that seemed to amplify the ugliness of what had just happened. Her tray held the next course. She served Marcus first, then his assistant, and the other investors, leaving Julian for last. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the protocol of service, but at a table where every nuance was analyzed. It was a statement. Julian's jaw tightened. He saw it. He didn't thank her. Instead, as she placed his plate before him, he muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Good to see she's finally learning her place." Ava's face remained a mask of professional calm. She didn't acknowledge the comment. She simply turned to refill the water glasses, her movements fluid and poised, even as the atmosphere around her crackled with tension. Marcus watched her. He saw the way she offered a warm, genuine smile to an elderly woman at the next table. He saw the way she bent down to pick up a fallen crayon and return it to a small child. Her eyes softening for just a moment. This wasn't just service. This was character in action. This was grace under fire. And Julian Thorne, for all his billions and his supposed genius, was utterly blind to it. He only saw a uniform. He only saw someone beneath him. "Let's get down to the numbers, Marcus," Julian said abruptly, trying to seize control. 5 billion. We can have the integration complete within 6 months. I guarantee you'll see a 200% return on your investment within 2 years. Marcus finally spoke. He held up a hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless stopped Julian mid-sentence. Before we discuss numbers, Julian, he said, his voice calm and level, I have always found it more prudent to discuss values. A visible chill went through the people at the table because in that single quiet sentence, Marcus had made it irrevocably clear. This dinner was no longer about a business deal. It was a character test, and Julian Thorne had just failed spectacularly. The tension in the room had shifted. It was no longer a sharp, brittle thing, but a dense, heavy fog. Everyone was pretending the incident hadn't happened, which only made its memory more potent. Ava approached Thetable again, the heavy silver water pitcher in her hand. Her movements were a masterclass in professional composure, each step measured, each pour precise. She had served hundreds of tables like this one, filled with dozens of men just like Julian Thorne. But this was different. This was the end game. She reached Julian's end of the table. As she tilted the pitcher to refill his glass, his hand shot out like a snake, his fingers clamping down on her wrist. The grip wasn't brutal enough to leave a bruise, but it was hard, controlling, and utterly demeaning. It was a message. "You will wait until I am finished speaking," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper, his breath hot with wine and fury. When men are conducting business, you do not interrupt. You stand still. You be invisible. That is what the help is supposed to do. His grip lingered for a moment too long. This time the room didn't stop. No one gasped, but every eye at the table, and many from the tables nearby, saw it. They saw the billionaire CEO physically restrain a waitress. Ava looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his eyes. She didn't struggle. She didn't look afraid. She met his stare, and in her eyes there was not fear, but a cold, clear focus. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. "I understand completely." Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that was all her own, she gently but firmly pulled her wrist from his grasp. She took one step back, her dignity a shield he could not penetrate. Julian blinked, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected her to flinch, to cower. He seemed disappointed that his final act of intimidation had failed to land. Across the table, Marcus Vance placed his knife and fork together on his untouched plate. He leaned over to Klaus, who had quietly returned to his side, and said 2 words in German. "Furus, executed." Klaus nodded and slipped away once more. Julian, still trying to salvage the unsalvageable, launched back into his pitch, his voice strained. But it was too late. Something had irrevocably broken. It wasn't just about spilled wine or a vile insult anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior. The kind of repeated offense that says, "This is not a mistake. This is who I am." That truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a witnessed fact. And the consequences were no longer a question of if, but of when and how. Publicly. Julian was in the middle of a sentence about projected fourth-quarter earnings when Marcus Vance slowly, deliberately rose from his seat. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't tap his glass. He simply stood, and the sheer weight of his presence commanded absolute silence. The table fell quiet. Then the entire room followed. Conversations dwindled. The harpist's hands stilled over her strings. The entire Astor Court seemed to be holding its breath, sensing that a moment of irreversible consequence was at hand. Marcus first looked at Ava, who had been standing poised and ready near the service station. She met his gaze across the room. It was a silent conversation between a father and daughter, a look of profound respect, of shared purpose, of love. With a nearly imperceptible nod that was both an acknowledgement and a green light, he turned his attention back to the table, his eyes finally landing on Julian Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, his voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Before we continue this discussion, there is someone of immense importance in this room whom I believe you have not been properly introduced to." Julian, utterly bewildered, managed a tight, forced smile. "Of course, Marcus. Are you referring to your head of acquisitions, or perhaps your general counsel?" Marcus ignored the question. He raised one hand, not toward his own executives, but toward the side of the room where Ava stood. "Ava, would you please join me?" A ripple of confusion went through the audience. Ava stepped forward. She was no longer carrying a tray. She had removed her service apron. She walked with a quiet confidence that was breathtaking to behold, her steps sure and even on the marble floor. She didn't stop behind Marcus or to the side. She stopped right beside him, a partner, an equal. Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Julian, everyone," he announced, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "I would like to introduce you to Ava Sterling, my daughter." The collective gasp in the room was a physical thing. A sharp intake of air that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the chandeliers. The air didn't just crack, it atomized. "She was adopted when she was 7 years old," Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. "She chose to keep her birth name, a name she wears with great pride. But make no mistake, she is my daughter in every single way that matters. And I am her father." Julian Thorne's face went through a rapid, horrifying series of transformations, from confusion to disbelief to dawning, sickening realization. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face, normally ruddy with power and confidence, had turned a pale ashen gray. "Ava has been working here for the last year," Marcus explained, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the room. "Not because she requires the income, but because she and I wanted her to understand firsthand how the men and women who lead our nation's companies treat the people they believe have no power, how they behave when they think no one of consequence is watching." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Tonight, all of you have been witnessed to a masterclass in that very subject." The murmur that rippled through the guests was electric. Phones, no longer discreet, were now held high, openly recording. The silence was gone, replaced by the thick, buzzing sound of a billion-dollar deal and a celebrated CEO's career spectacularly imploding in real time. Ava stood tall, her chin high. She was not gloating. She was not vengeful. She was simply present, seen, vindicated. Marcus turned his gaze back to Julian Thorne one last time, his eyes cold as a winter sea. "The woman you called a ghetto charity case is a Stanford honors student who gave up an Olympic dream to care for her disabled brother. The woman whose intelligence you insulted is the person I trust most for her insights into human character. The help you manhandled is the future of my entire enterprise." He let that final statement hang in there for a heart-topping second. "The deal is off, Julian, and I suggest you check your company's stock price. I have a feeling it's about to undergo a significant market correction." The sound of a single chair scraping back should not sound like a death nail. But tonight, it did. Marcus Vance calmly sat back down, picked up his napkin, and placed it on the table. The show was over. The room remained stunned into silence for a moment, and then the exodus began. It started with one of Marcus's associates standing up, then another. A venture capitalist from a rival firm quickly followed suit, muttering, "Unbelievable," as he walked away. It was a quiet, bloodless coup. Within 5 minutes, half the tables were empty. The ones who remained were furiously typing on their phones, selling off their shares of Apex Dynamics before the news went public. Julian Thorne was left standing alone at the head of the table, a king deposed in his own court, the ruins of his empire collapsing around him. Klause, Marcus's assistant, reappeared at Marcus's side and whispered in his ear. Marcus nodded once. That was the final signal. Less than 10 minutes later, the first alerts hit the phones of every financial journalist in the country. Vance Capital pulls out of Apex Dynamics acquisition. Sources cite incident at private NYC gala. That was the first tremor. Then came the earthquake. A video shot from a nearby table clear as day went viral on X. The hashtagger ghetto charity case waste trending worldwide within the hour. Billionaire CEO Julian Thorne caught in racist abusive rant. The waitress who cost a CEO $5 billion. Daughter of Marcus Vance was undercover waitress in Thorne meltdown. By the time the staff began clearing the untouched dessert plates, Apex Dynamics stock was in freefall, plummeting 27% in after-hours trading, wiping out nearly $3 billion of value. Julian's phone was a vibrating, glowing brick of pure chaos. Panicked calls from board members, apocalyptic texts from his PR chief, furious emails from investors demanding answers. But there was no PR strategy that could spin this. The truth was raw, recorded, and relentless. By 11:47 p.m., the Apex Dynamics board had convened an emergency virtual meeting. At 12:14 a.m., they voted unanimously to suspend him indefinitely, pending an internal investigation. By sunrise, Julian Thorne wasn't a titan of industry anymore. He was a meme, a pariah, a headline in the business section under a single brutal word: collapse. The next morning, while the financial world was still processing the shockwaves, Ava Sterling walked into the gleaming headquarters of Vance Capital in Midtown Manhattan. She was not wearing a uniform. She was not carrying a tray. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer and trousers that signified she was there for business. She wasn't just entering a building. She was stepping into her destiny. Waiting for her on the 50th floor in a corner office with a panoramic view of Central Park was a new sleek nameplate on the door. It didn't say director or vice president. It said something new, something radical. Ava Sterling, Chief Conscience Officer. The title wasn't a PR stunt. It was a statement of intent, a real position created at Marcus's insistence weeks ago, waiting for the right moment to be filled. It came with full executive authority and a 9-figure budget to invest in and partner with companies that prioritized ethical leadership and human dignity as much as they did profit margins. It was a role for a woman who'd seen the absolute worst of corporate culture from the ground up. Later that afternoon, Ava stood on a stage at a company-wide town hall, live-streamed to thousands of Vance Capital employees around the globe. Many of them had only seen her face in the viral clips, the quiet, dignified waitress. Now they would hear her voice. She stepped to the microphone. The room, both physical and virtual, fell silent. "Yesterday," she began, her voice calm and clear, "a man in a position of immense power tried to make me feel small. He used words meant to strip me of my humanity simply because he believed his title made him more valuable than me." She paused, letting her words sink in. I said nothing in that moment. I didn't have to. His actions spoke for him. But today, I am choosing to speak. For too long, the world of business has operated under the false premise that decency is a liability and ruthlessness is a strength. We've celebrated the disruptors, the predators, the leaders who leave a trail of broken people in their wake, all in the name of shareholder value. Today, that era ends. There is a difference between power and leadership. Power is taken. Leadership is earned, and it is earned through respect, through empathy, through the courage to see the value in every single person, not just the ones who can do something for you. My new role here is not just a title. It is a mission. We will begin to calculate a new kind of ROI, the return on integrity. We will invest in companies where people are valued not for what they produce, but for who they are. We will prove that the most profitable companies of the future will be the ones with the strongest moral compass, because character is capital and our conscience will be our currency. A wave of applause started at the front of the room and swelled into a standing ovation. It wasn't polite corporate clapping. It was real, it was loud, and it was filled with hope. Because in Ava, they didn't just see their boss's daughter. They saw a reflection of a better way forward. They saw a future they wanted to be a part of. What happened in that ballroom wasn't just about one arrogant CEO and one underestimated waitress. It was astery about all of us. It's about the small daily choices we make when we think no one is watching. How we speak to the call center representative. How we treat the janitor in our office building. Whether we see the person behind the uniform. Those are the moments that define our character far more than any big speech or public donation. Julian Thorne didn't lose his empire because he was bad at business. He lost it because he was bankrupt as a human being. He failed the simplest test of all, the test of basic human decency. And Ava Sterling, she reminded the world of a truth we too often forget. The true strength isn't loud, it's quiet. That dignity is not something that can be given or taken away. It is something you live, and that the real leaders are not always the ones at the head of the table. Sometimes they're the ones who have been clearing it all along, watching, learning, and waiting for their moment to lead. So, I'll ask you this. What would you do if you knew the person you were about to dismiss, ignore, or belittle held the keys to your entire future? Would you treat them differently? If the answer is yes, then you're asking the wrong question. The real question is, why should that even matter? If you believe that dignity should never be optional, that every single person has value, then share this story. Let this be a reminder that being a decent human being isn't just a nice idea. In the end, it's the only thing that truly matters. Our legacy is not written on stock tickers or in headlines. It's written in the way we treat people. And that story starts with you. And it starts right now. Thank you for watching. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that matter. Because the world is changed not by the loud and the powerful, but by the quiet and the courageous. One act of dignity at a time. Go out and be one of them.